The other thing I did was I set up continuous integration using Travis CI. There's a lot of ways you can do it, but today I want to specifically talk about Travis because in a lot of ways it's free for open source, and in this case it's an open source project. It supports a lot of versions of Xcode and macOS, and also supports building, testing, and deployment. In your Travis file, your Travis YAML file, you'll want to say what the language is Objective-C, and then it'll actually use macOS images instead of the Linux Ubuntu ones or whatever they use. And then you'll also want to either specify your workspace or your project you'll be testing with, and then you have to specify your scheme, which has to be shared within Xcode. Once you get that, that's like the basics of getting a Travis CI project to work. But as far as advanced, there are a couple of things I had to do. I used one CocoaPod that I had to integrate, and then we'll also talk about signing and distribution. CocoaPods are automatically run by default within the default application. So if you have a pod file, it'll automatically use that to install. In this case, there were some things that I was using that were Ruby related, so I had to actually run it manually. So in my before install, I make sure to run bundler install. I update the repo and then use pod install to install the pods. But the real challenge is distribution and preparing your certificates and keys for distribution. In this case, I was uploading my application to a GitHub release. So there's some things to note about how to make sure that when you build the app and archive it and package it, that you have the certificates installed on your Travis CI image. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to go to the signing section and find your distribution profile, and you're going to find your key, and you're going to make sure that you import that. But the most important thing is, with your certificate and your key, do not include it in your repo. You want to encrypt your files. So I want to say that one more time. Like, don't add your certificates, keys, and provisioning files to your repo without encryption. That's absolutely. I think provisioning, you probably could get away with that. But like, the certificates and keys, anybody could use that.
Sure.
Pretend to be. Yeah. Yeah. So in this case, I didn't actually use a provisioning profile because I'm not using the Mac App Store. But I did use certificates and keys, and those are encrypted. I'll talk about that in a little bit. So you'll see here in my screenshot in Xcode, I talk about, I have here the signing certificate. So a signing certificate will also have like a alphanumeric character in front of it that'll tell you what signing certificate you want to export. From there, you're going to go to your keys, and you'll find the Mac developer certificate there. You're going to want that one, and then you're going to also want your developer ID, because in this case, I'm exporting it as developer ID signed as opposed to App Store signed. And you'll want to export those there and password protect them. And of course, make sure you know what your password is, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So once you've exported your certificates and your keys, Travis has a command line tool that you can download and install, or you can do it manually using an OpenSSL, and you then export the file. If you use the Travis way, it will automatically save the password that's used to decrypt the file within Travis CI's environment, so you don't have to do that yourself. If you do it manually, you're going to have to grab whatever certificate password you use and save that to Travis CI within the web interface. So once you do that, now you can then add the encrypted certificates and keys to your repo, and it should be safe there. So add the encrypted certificates to the repo, add the Apple certificate. Sometimes it'll need that, and that's downloadable, and that you can add to your repo because that's not a big deal. And then add your decrypting script to Travis CI. So here, once you've done that, once you have the decryption set up, the next step is just importing those keychains, or importing those certificates and keys into the keychain. So here's the script that I use to import the keychain. So the first thing I do is I create a keychain for just my build. and then go ahead and tell it that this is the default keychain it's going to be using for this build process. From there, I unlock the keychain using the password that's saved in the CI environment that I don't know what it is because it's encrypted, or it's actually hidden behind once you've set it up. And then set a timeout to make sure that that keychain isn't useful after 3 hours, just kind of to make sure everything's secure. And then import the Mac development and the developer ID certificates and keys that I need to archive and package my app. And then there's one script to kind of, it's a fix for anything after Sierra, where it sometimes can halt. So the next steps is then just archiving the application, which is the first line you see here. And then we export the archive as a .app file. And then I use Ditto to zip up the app file, which I can then upload to wherever I need to. When you export the archive, you need a exportOptions.plist. This is basically what I have right now because I don't use a lot more than just the developer ID method for packaging this. It has my team ID right there, and then it uses that to export the app file that's used. So the last thing I added was the command line interface. I'll talk about this real brief, but it was a big no-no I found to use the the app itself as a way to run the command. And a lot of people suggest, and there's probably, if you use Sublime, for instance, they do this. They have a separate command line executable that you then install yourself using, copy it to user bin lib or user local bin. So that's what I did here is I created a separate target for the command line. And what that does is it will go ahead and look for the bundle of my application, which I know the bundle identifier, and run it through that. So the way to do that is you use what's called the NS meta query. You say that you're looking for all the applications on the system. It will then actually uses notification center. So you want to add an observer for a notification called NS meta query did finish. And then go ahead to make sure that whatever applications it finds, it matches my bundle identifier. Once I know that, I have the bundle. And then from there, I can grab the bundle's executable URL because I can just access the bundle. And then remove the first argument that was passed to the command because the first argument is going to be actual command name itself. And then make sure I pipe the standard output error from that application to my application. And then here's where I handle any error handling. If the bundle was not found, for instance, or for instance there was a crash within the application itself, I then have access to that and I exit either with a 0 for success or a 1 if there was an error. So the features I'm looking at adding at some point is be interesting to add it to the Mac App Store, but sandboxing is a big hurdle. I'd like to have CocoaPods integration so you don't have to necessarily install the app, but just have it as a pod, kind of how SwiftLint or Swift format does things. Fastlane integration, which I actually talked to Felix at TrySwift about. I think that's something I want to move forward with, and maybe installing it from a homebrew package again. Plugins for Photoshop and Sketch and Editor UI, since the JSON format might not be intuitive for some people. Sometimes people want to export different sizes using different SVGs, maybe adding some graphic filters, automating the command line installation rather than having people manually copy the command, caching results so that it doesn't actually export the graphics if they already exist, managing the C++ dependencies, increasing unit test coverage, and code documentation. So this is kind of what I talked to about here. Any questions?